Thanks, everyone, and thank you for our speakers for the first half of the program. It was very, very informative. I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. One is we're very pleased to let you know that we have moved into our new offices in downtown Kelseyville, a beautiful, independent, standalone building, which is, as growers, your place. It's nice, it has two offices, but mainly we have a tasting room and presentation room in the back. So if anybody in the future wants to do tastings, invite press, or just buyers, entertain them, we'll be making that available. And we'll also be doing a series of events there, including just wine tastings. But as we joke with Deborah, it's that every club needs a secret clubhouse, so now we have ours. That will be forthcoming. So let me thank a lot of people, by the way. This is the third of the 3 Momentum series. Of course, Deborah and Susan, first and foremost, for putting on such a great series of events. But we'd like to thank the USDA for the specialty block grant, the Soper-Reese Theater, where we are here, for this facility and their very professional staff, Lake Event Design and Rental, who put on a lot of the presentation, the Winery Association, and of course, Terry Derenick, our speakers and panelists, and our sponsors, Allied Grape Growers, American Ag Credit, Lincoln Levitt Insurance, North Coast Vineyards, PG&E, Savings Banks of Mendocino, and Western Weather, who is a very, very good sponsor, but we really wanted them to make some rain come, but that's still ahead of us. So let's get started here. This will be a very similar format to last time. This is a chance to really talk with grape buyers, winemakers. In the past, we had winemakers in the past session about their views on Lake County, their experiences here, the views on relationships and what's critical in that winery-vineyard relationship that we talked on earlier today. So before I get too far along, let me introduce everybody. Tony Benedetti is the COO and CFO of Honig Winery. Honig is a family-owned winery in the Napa Valley that specializes in Cabernet Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc, and they source grapes for both programs from Lake County. Skip Lovin, Kendall Jackson, has been buying grapes in Lake County for 14 years. Kendall Jackson has been a mainstay of our industry up here. And Doug Price from Constellation Brands. Doug, how long have you been buying grapes in Lake County? You've worked now for the same winery, but 3 different ones, or something to that effect?
Exactly. So, well, in my position of grower relations, coming up here since probably about 7 years now.
About 7 years, okay, great.
But they've been in it a lot longer.
Sorry, your microphone. If you could do that one more time.
In my position with grower relations, it's been 7 years that I've been coming up to Lake County, but prior to that, Constellation has had or Clos du Bois has had a presence up, probably as long as I've been with Clos du Bois, which is 14 years.
So a long time. Let's get into some experiences in Lake County. One of the things we always ask is, what brought you to Lake County? What do you source here in Lake County? How does it fit into your winery and into brand strategies? And how have your experiences been here as a buyer? Let me start with you, Tony.
Well, we started in Lake County probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And basically, it had to do with blending down costs. Lake County fruit was less expensive than Napa Valley fruit. We are a Napa Valley brand, and obviously the vast majority of our fruit comes from Napa Valley. We're getting a little out of Sonoma County. We moved out of Sonoma County, got a little out of Mendocino County, and then we moved into Lake County. For us, it was just a question of blending down our price, and what we found was good quality fruit that worked in our program.
And results so far?
Yeah, it has been very good, actually. Plug to Peter, we buy some of his Cabernet, and 2011, it was some of the best Cabernet we purchased, including all of our Napa Valley, because of the weather and such. We buy a fair amount of Sauvignon Blanc out of Lake County. It adds to our program, it helps us with our costs, and it works in our profile.
Skip?
Well, Jackson family started here in the early 80s, and originally it was Chateau du Lac. If anybody has a bottle of that left over somewhere. I think our PR department would probably buy it from you if you have one of those. Larry, you get that? He might. And still continue. The Lakeport facility was shut down there for a few years in our massive cost-cutting strategy to survive. But we've now crushed grapes there for 3 years and plan to do so again this year and into the future. The principal variety we buy is Sauvignon Blanc, and when we call funding programs with tons and dollars, Lake County Sauvignon Blanc is our go-to place for Sauvignon Blanc and those brands.
How many tons of SB do you buy now, roughly, from Lake County?
1,500, the better part of 1,500, depending on the year.
And over the 14 years buying here, have you seen a change in both viticultural practices or mainly viticultural practices, wine quality, how the winemakers within your winery treat the fruit, handle the fruit?
Yeah, the style and the winemaking has developed over time. We do a lot more reductive, what they call reductive winemaking with the Sauvignon Blanc to give it some complexity without having too much greenness in it. Would be the biggest change in the last 5 years, and that's probably gone up to about 25% of the Vintner Reserve blend in particular. Viticultural-wise, it's mostly, I would say, our style. We need sunlight on the fruit. The amount of canopy is not so important as long as sunlight can penetrate that canopy. And the average production per ton has gone up, I would say, well, gone up tremendously, maybe 50% in 10 years. The tons per acre, again, have to be balanced, but it's probably 14 years ago, whenever I started this, I thought 5 or 6 tons the acre was a huge crop, and now that's not particularly economical. And on the particular side, on particular vineyards and growers, double that is quite possible.
And the quality's there for your program?
Excuse me?
And the quality stays for your program?
Yes, I would definitely,
Yeah.
or better.
All right. Doug, experiences in Lake County?
Yes, well, for the most part, we're up here purchasing the 2 varieties. I'd say, Chard's supposed to be queen, but up here in Lake County, I'd call, Sauvignon Blanc is queen, Cab, of course, is the king. And so what our purposes in purchasing for Clos de Bois is looking for, a value and high quality. And we find that here, the Sauvignon Blanc we're purchasing is more kind of on the leaner and greener, but with good fruit components, and with a bit of, we don't need a lot of light penetration, but we're looking for clean and ripe. So those are real good elements, and working with the grower to achieve that. We're not shy with tonnage. Now with Cabernet, it's a different story. We have a different quality parameter there, but again, it's getting ripeness and full ripeness, full tannin ripeness, and that will oftentimes go into North Coast programs. We've also branched out, and then some of our Napa brands are coming up and working with growers here to get a little bit out of appellation to help with their blend costs. And we're finding that to work out quite well also.
So internally, in your wineries, both of you have 2 of the largest wineries or wine companies in the North Coast or in the country. So you probably work with a dozen or more winemakers across various programs. I'm assuming a few key ones. Have you seen a shift or change in winemakers' understanding of Lake County as appellation, appreciation of Lake County as an appellation, and I guess more specifically, adapting wine style to the fruit up here?
Okay. Well, I still, actually, for the entire time, I think, almost the entire time I've worked for Kendall Jackson, Fritz Meyer has been the Sauvignon Blanc winemaker. And yeah, I would say that his experience with the fruit over that much time, and certainly in some of the same places, growers, vineyards, allows him to make a better wine and a more consistent wine year in and year out. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, you've also used other varietals than SB?
Sometimes, usually there's some Simeon in it. We have, still one of our vineyards has an old Simeon vineyard, and that usually goes in the Vineyards Reserve.
Doug, how about a consolation in terms of the winemakers and their programs?
Yeah, well, we definitely have more than a handful of winemakers that are working with the fruit that comes from here. However, the bulk, the North Coast label for Clos de Bois is done by Sue DiAgostini, who's actually a resident of Lake County. So she sees it every day as she drives down to the winery, but she's been working now probably the equivalent amount of time as I have. I think we started at the same time, but 14 years with it, and she's very familiar and very, she really likes the fruit. Working now with a Napa winemaker, and she has just started last year, was her first vintage, so she's getting to get a handle on it, but very pleased with what she received last year.
So it seems like a lot of consistency within both your companies about who works with the Lake County fruit in both cases.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move to the question of relationships and what makes a good winery-vineyard relationship. And like all relationships, I think wine always helps. So we have 4 wines in front of you before we get started. We're not going to technically taste these today to discuss them, but they are in front of you. We thought it would give you a good example of the wines that are being made. So feel free to taste as we go through them. And we talk about, we'll do Cabernet last because that, but as you're sipping a glass of wine, Doug, tell me what you think really counts in a really good, productive, long-term grower-winemaker relationship.
I think it's fairly simple. There's the main one is the first in any relationship, and that's the open and clear communications. Just if we can start off there and we're talking the whole way through, anything. My phone's always available, and likewise, I hope I have the opportunity to call you whenever I see anything. But truly, that's probably the best thing. The other one is just understanding the bottle or the SKU that your grape is going into, and so that if you understand that your expectations are, or you understand your expectations, and we know what our expectations are for that. So if we know where we're trying to place that block and what bottle it's going into. So that part of that communication is getting you to understand where it's going to, and then seeing, okay, how we both can work in that realm, so that we're not over, I guess being over optimistic that the vineyard is going somewhere that it demands more money than what we're able to produce it for.
A critical part, for sure. It was interesting in the last part with last seminar with Christian Miller. He did a very, and also Silicon Valley Bank showed a lot of the margin pressures that vineyards and wineries have dealt with since the downturn in 2008. Things have gotten better, but when we get to you, Tony, I'll ask you a little bit about that, about the flexibility wineries have to pay good prices, or higher prices rather. Skip, your thoughts on good relationships between the winery and, I'm sure you've had some very good ones and ones that weren't so great, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I'm very fortunate. The vast majority have been great. I had a boss early on in this job, and he told me my job was to manage expectations. And I thought he was talking about growers, but actually he was talking about lots of things. And I think the number one thing that I found is managing expectations of the winemaker and the grower, sort of the person in between, to try to explain the meaning of that and the importance of it. And with a good dialogue, as Doug said, we should come to a pretty clear understanding of what everybody's going to do when it gets down through the growing year and to harvest. And then when we get to harvest, we all have to understand that it's all going to get thrown off the window, and we're going to talk a whole lot during that period of time and do the best we can with whatever nature and the harvest brings us. And fortunately, that's worked out, in my case, 99% of the time, and it's a huge matter of give and take. And in those few instances when it didn't, I think the expectations just didn't align, and hopefully everyone just parted and wished each other the best of luck. But most of it did work out very well.
So intensive cell phone calling during harvest seems to be a key part of this.
Well, not anymore. Now, unfortunately, it's all about texting.
Texting, sorry, exactly.
No, we don't use a lot of voice communication anymore.
That's right. Tony, let's take a look at this question in relationships, but you come with a financial background. You were with American Ag Credit for a number of years before you joined Honig. Can you take us through, and also I just want to mention Honig, I think, buys a majority of the fruit. And I think you grow just a little bit of your own, so you have a lot of experience both here and all throughout the North Coast. Thoughts on relationships and maybe looking at it from a financial eye?
Well, relationships, when Doug started, he said it's about, what was the first thing he said? Anyhow, the first word I thought of was expectations, and then of course they both hammered on expectations. And that is I think the single most important thing in the relationship with the growers is expectations. It has to do with the expectations of what do you want to get paid for your fruit, and it's our expectations of what we can pay. And it has to do with the expectations of the quality of fruit that we're going to get from you relative to prices, and the expectation of what your costs are going to be to produce that quality of fruit. So relationships are all about communication about the expectations. The first thing I do whenever I contact a new grower is I kind of have almost a canned speech. I say, this is what I expect in relationship with a grower, and I go through the whole thing, and I talk about who we are as a company and what our bottle prices are, and then how that relates to what we can afford to pay in fruit. And that has, that's communication, that's honesty, that's explaining your expectations. And so that's one of the things that I think is the most important thing in the relationship. Financial, you asked about the financial. Everyone works on a margin. The wineries are working on a margin. The growers are working on a margin. It becomes a constant review of what can you afford, what can we afford to pay for grapes, and what can you afford to sell your grapes for? And that is driven in large part by what we can sell our bottle for. And as Andy has said for many, many years, he has a bottle formula. And that works in some cases, and it depends what your price point is, and then where you fit in the whole market. So I don't know that I have an easy answer for the financial question, but the question is that you need to know your own numbers. You need to know what you can afford to sell your fruit for, and what your expectations are, and what makes you happy. And then you need to talk to the winery about that. And if we want your fruit, we're going to meet your expectations.
So let me dig in a little bit about the margins thing. I think you once showed me that you have a 60-page spreadsheet that looks across 3 years of production, and that includes a lot of what you think you can sell the wine for. But, let's pull the veil aside a little bit for growers and follow up on what Christian Miller talked about in Silicon Valley Bank about margin pressures. So where you guys are now producing close to, I think, 20,000 cases of Cabernet, close to it, and I don't know if the Sauvignon Blanc is a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
And so you're a mid-sized winery, not a giant and not small either. Talk about your channels, talk about how the pressures are, how you see the market evolving for price points, your price points. And just to remind everybody, the Sauvignon Blanc, I think, runs mid-teens.
Yeah, $16, $17, $17 a bottle for the most part.
And the cab is 35.
35 to 40, depending on the market. So, let's see, I'm trying to think, you asked several questions in there, I'm trying to remember.
Well,
which
just
one.
sort of, when you're forecasting and looking ahead, and I guess that really comes to bear when you're negotiating a contract, because you're looking at a contract that you're paying for in 3 years' time. You want to be able to make sure you can pay that amount and it fits your margins. What on your side of the table, looking at your distributors, looking at the marketplace, what are some of the tendencies, the trends, the pressures that you feel?
Well, the pressures, the biggest thing in the winery is, can you sell the wine you're making? And the worst thing that can happen is either due to quality or price points, lack of marketing, whatever the issues are, is not being able to sell that wine. So it has a lot to do with where you are in the marketplace and quality and prices. And if you can sell your wine and you're in high demand, and then you can raise your prices. You can raise your prices, you're going to increase your margins, you can pay more to the grower. You're right, I have a very large spreadsheet. It's actually 5 years and it was 80 pages. Although I have shortened it down a little bit now. But, and what I literally do is I take my financial statements and spread them out over 5 years. And I know what I can afford to pay for fruit based on a acceptable margin for the winery. And a lot of wineries operate, they're kind of all over the board. I mean, it really depends on the particular winery. So it's hard to throw out just numbers. But what I do in my forecasting is I take projections both in volume and in dollars. And we sell in every state, and we sell out of in 30 countries, export. And I basically forecast all my revenue in essence, and it's a composite over out of state, in state, retail, the whole thing. And then you just peel that back to what our gross margin is. And then I go to I figure out how many grapes I need to buy to fulfill those sales. And grapes for us, we buy about 80% of our fruit. And so they're a huge part of our budget. And if I don't keep that in line with our bottle prices, then we're not going to be able to stay where we want to be financially. We're, in essence, I call ourselves a small Napa Valley winery, family-owned winery. Small because we only do 2 varietals. Small because we are a very flat organization. If you want to talk, I'm the COO, CFO. I deal with all the grape contracts, so I deal directly with the growers. And our winemaker, we have one winemaker, and she's out in most of the vineyards. So we're a small winery. Family owned, so we have to obviously, meet their financial expectations.
It sounds like one of the first things, I've often thought about this, one of the first things to talk about with a new relationship is the bottle price point. I mean, at some point, that almost dictates everything you guys are looking at in terms of, you were saying, I don't want to overpromise where this fruit could go no matter how good it is, because there may not be room at that volume. Skip, you were talking about managing expectations from the get-go. I mean, you're looking out, seeing if you can sell your wine in 3 years, which in this world is sometimes a difficult proposition, I'm sure. So the price point seems to be almost the underpinning, the bottle price point seems to be underpinning of the whole relationship, at least on the financial side. So,
Just to follow up on what I said, yeah, I think that's, in my canned speech, that's one of the first things I go to. You know what our bottle price is. So hopefully they don't come in and want something significantly more than our bottle price. And if they do, I immediately will come back and say, this isn't a realistic relationship. And I have done that. I go, your expectations do not meet what we can financially do. And sometimes that's the end of the conversation.
So let's talk about the North Coast in general and the future, the 20-year crystal ball possibly, but let me start with the specific question to you. Through a lot of very good winemaking and a lot of good marketing, the North Coast, the consumption of North Coast wines continues to increase year on year. I don't think it's really very much dipped in the last 20 years since the early 90s, as we saw last seminar. But there aren't a lot of new plantings going, at least not at the clip that the actual consumption is going up. Are there enough grapes in the North Coast for programs? And how does that change in the future? And how does that change Lake County's position and its economic prospects in terms of the type of programs that you would imagine putting this fruit into, as opposed to, say, going to Lodi or going to Central Coast or going to other places? I hope I'm formulating that well, but do you see a higher demand and higher prices in the county for both all of our varietals, but let's stick with Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon? That's a leading question, I know, by the way, sorry.
I can hit that real fast. For us, because we buy so much fruit, we're obviously looking at our blended prices, and we look to Lake County to blend down some of our some of our costs. But we're all about value, and I said that wrong. Excuse me. Very much about quality and a value relationship, and we found Lake County to fit our needs. We started with Sonoma County, didn't work quite right, nor did Mendocino. Lake County, from a quality standpoint, has met our quality standards, and because of the prices, has helped us and has attracted us to come here and buy a percentage of our fruit out of Lake County.
For us, in our North Coast programs, which have been growing steadily, the Lake County provides us with, I can't remember, I can't even read it, the percentage of, I think it's 55% of our North Coast Sauvignon Blanc blend is 55, good, is coming from Lake County. And as that program steadily grows, that percentage is probably going to go up because our bottle price is dictating that we're purchasing from there. The other 45% is coming mostly from Sonoma County. And as you could, if you look at the district average in Sonoma County, you can see that's gone up again, and the fruit is getting harder to find there, harder to source. So it's going to be less of our blend is going to be going into, or the North Coast blend is be coming out of Sonoma County, and we're going to come and rely more on other North Coast suppliers. And so far, Lake County has been the best area to get that from. So I think we're, as the continued growth goes, there's not a lot of new planting going on. We're going to be looking a little harder up here, but also other places too, because eventually that, the Sonoma County element's going to go away just because of pricing.
Skip?
Where we won't, Jess Jackson was very adamant about the coastal counties and the coastal fruit, which he included Lake County, kind of grandfathered in from being the first vineyard he owned, I guess. But, and it was discussed occasionally, and it's still discussed occasionally, but I don't see any time in the future us buying anywhere outside the coastal counties. And in terms of Sauvignon Blanc, you can see by these percentages on the two wines here, Lake County is a huge percentage of it, and will continue into the future as far as I can see. One thing also, looking ahead, we've made, first time this year, a Sauvignon Blanc under the Avant brand. The Avant brand was started with a quote-unquote no-oak Chardonnay, but it's not really no-oak. But less oak, less malolactic, in a style that seemed to catch on compared to Vintner Reserve Chardonnay, which is, well, quite a big, thick wine, which has a great following, and we don't want to lose that. But Sauvignon Blanc, actually, our sales of Sauvignon Blanc have been rather, well, stagnant the last couple of years, 3 years actually. Took a huge dip in the late 2000s when you could buy a lot of Sauvignon Blanc for far less than $10 a bottle. But we came back from that and we kind of pulled back to where we were before, but it hasn't grown. And so they've started, they just came up with a different blend. Fritz is still going to be the winemaker for this. It'll be a little bit more toward the grassy side, as opposed to the Vintner Reserve here is what we call full fruit, very ripe, and don't tell anybody, but there's even a tiny bit of residual sugar in there. And that style seems to has a market, but it's not growing. So hopefully with this year, and they did a repackaging on the Avant brand, and that fruit will be primarily sourced in Lake County, and hopefully have great success and give us a larger presence in Sauvignon Blanc, which we're doing. We kind of measure ourselves of how we're doing in terms of the overall market, and we're not keeping up with we're losing market share in Sauvignon Blanc. We're actually losing market share in Cabernet Sauvignon, and but I have confidence the family will work hard to try to alleviate that situation.
So I'd like to open up to the floor. Any questions from our panelists? Yep, I think they're coming down. They were just charging.
Where was the question?
This question is mostly for Skip. Your wines are well over the 75% Lake County. What do we need to do to get the appellation on your bottles changed from North Coast or California to Lake County?
Well, eventually, I would say you have to have a reputation like Napa. The appellation question is, I have nothing to do with that. It's a marketing decision, and the marketing people say, and I think with some authority, it doesn't make any difference. It's not going to help them sell wine, and to some extent, it's confusing. And also, to be perfectly honest with you, we want to sell wine as a brand, not as a place. We want them to buy Kendall Jackson wine, Murphy Good wine, La Crema wine, and they certainly will utilize appellations, to help them, but what we're selling is a brand to the consumer, and that's our business. It doesn't mean it's necessarily other people can do this. An appellation is very, very, very important to many wineries, and that would, I think overall in the long run you want to push that. But in our particular marketing situation, we don't emphasize appellation. But we certainly like buying the grapes here.
Glenn?
So I'll put out the proposition that Sauvignon Blanc, and while Lake County really owns Sauvignon Blanc, as far as I'm concerned, there's really no other region that makes such a terroir-driven wine in the Sauvignon Blanc category. And it's unique circumstances. It's, first of all, the Big Valley is cooler than people think. It's actually a high region 2, low region 3, so it's not really a hot growing region. It's a warmish growing region. It's continental. And finally, very terroir-driven. The high magnesium soils that a lot of other varieties, like if we plant Chardonnay in our typical Clear Lake clay or coal loam really has a tough time just getting enough potassium to ripen the fruit, but Sauvignon Blanc just thrives. And all three of these wines to me, aromatically, are really, really good. And I think that while Cabernet is the future, the Sauvignon is the now. And it's something that I hope that Lake County builds on. And I think the winemakers already get it, just sort of looking at the percentages of Sauvignon Blanc from Lake County that are in these wines. But, it's a small niche, but it's a niche that I think Lake County owns, and it's one that I hope that they build on.
One of the things that struck me about the wine opinion survey last seminar was that no one region in California has sort of grabbed the brass ring for Sauvignon Blanc in the consumer's mind. And in a way that door is sort of open for us. But one other thing is we did a tasting with sommeliers in San Francisco about 2 weeks ago. It was 20 wines that only got golds or above in the Chronicle Wine Competition. And to the one of the sommeliers who were there, the Sauvignon Blancs and the whites really, the reds did very well too, but to your point, they echoed your comments there, Glenn. Any thoughts on Sauvignon Blanc in higher price point categories? I mean, your Sauvignon Blanc is a benchmark, like Napa Sauvignon Blanc. Kristen wouldn't put just okay fruit in that wine.
We are Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc. We like the Lake County fruit, but as our winemaker says, we can only put so much in it before it starts changing our characteristic. And we're known for our characteristic of wine. So for us, it's going to be different, if you're mainly Lake County, but for us, we're Napa County Sauvignon Blanc, and we can use Lake County fruit, but only to a certain percentage.
Yes, Buzz.
I just had a grower question really for all of you, actually. Our main variety, Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon, we make deliveries. We're the last area to make deliveries, and you're having to deal with stuff coming from the other areas. And I'm just wondering, are there logistical problems that crop in? Are there varietals in some other areas that have to move out of the way of the very tanks that we're going to be put into that are typical for a season for these varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc?
Well, for Sauvignon Blanc, I think you're coming at the end of say, Sonoma and probably Napa's Sauvignon vintage. So you're coming in at a good time, probably in between, or just ahead of a lot of Chardonnay, probably mixed in with a bit of Chardonnay. So great time to be, picking. The winemakers have had a chance to come up and taste, and as they line out their harvest, it may be towards the end, but I've picked up here, right on it with Alexander Valley, so that it's not too different. It's at the beginning, so there's plenty of tanks. So for Sauvignon Blanc, it fits right in. It's never a problem. Now, when we start getting into the cab, then you guys, Lake County is towards the end of, for the most part, we're creeping in on middle October and a little past that. So you're right in the thick of it with everybody else that's coming in at that period of time. So that's where we're going to be looking critically at the tannin development, the PHTA, sugar, of course, but that never tends to be a problem up here, and scheduling according to how the winemakers feels that those are coming along with the analysis and the flavors that they're getting in the field.
Well, as far as scheduling Lake County Sauvignon Blanc, it actually works out very well. If you start picking, say, in Middletown or Kelseyville, and 3 weeks, sometimes even a month, you'll be picking in Upper Lake. So we don't want to buy all the tons in one spot, early or late, or in between. So being able to spread that over probably at least a 3-week period is a great advantage.
Questions? Terry is the president of the Winery Association here in Lake County, just so you guys know.
Thank you, Peter. So my question for you gentlemen, earlier we heard a really interesting presentation about contract negotiations. How does that play in from your perspective for the contracts that you do with your growers? How open are you to having some give and take about what the contract says? And what do you feel your success is in preventing those sticky situations? I appreciate your comments about continued communication. I think that's key. But when the rubber hits the road, how does that paper play in?
Well, we have a standard contract, and it doesn't change very much. I mean, tonnage, price, acreage, but what it says, it seldom changes. I guess that's mostly for our convenience and standardization. I guess we do enough business with enough growers and it's work, so I guess that says something. The sticky situations, gosh. Well, I would say we just try to get through it as quickly as possible and be done with it. It's because if you're talking sticky as in bad and irreparable, then, you know, that's just something to live through and be done with. Did that kind of answer your question? How sticky are we talking about?
I don't know. I guess it could vary.
I mean, we deal with, at harvest, I guess is the time. Growers I've dealt with for many years, we deal with sticky situations constantly, all the time, especially during harvest. And we just deal with it. We get it done, again, quickly, and I don't think without any harm or difficulty whatsoever. It's a tremendous amount of give and take. I mean, I can be asking, you know, begging for favors, and they could be asking for things. And generally, I find it overall works out. At least it has certainly to me and my company's satisfaction, and I'm assuming pretty well with most of the growers.
Okay. Thank you.
Regarding contracts, that was an excellent presentation on the contracts. I had a grower one time, actually a Lake County grower, first time I worked with him, sent me back his contract, and our contract's about 5 pages, fairly large type, and he goes, "That is the best contract." He goes, "It's written in English, and I can understand it, and it made sense, and all that." And there's nothing super unique about our contract. It's pretty common sense. It's easy to read, easier to understand. I try to do that. And the sticky situations, I really look at as, for us, we buy a lot of fruit. Our relationships with our growers are some of the most valuable assets we have, is our relationship with our growers. And I often will, when I negotiate with growers, whether it's sometimes with price or whether it's the sticky situations, sometimes I do the, okay, you win this time, I win next time. And you look at it over multiple years, because most of our growers are multiple year relationships. So, like you said, you use common sense, you work through them pretty fast, you try not to, best thing is not to take advantage of the relationships, and you just get through them.
Yeah, for us, we have a fairly simple contract too, from what I've seen. And it's fairly short and I think concise. But I think the best thing, you know, if there's, when a grower's looking at a contract and they're saying, well, should I sign first time, is probably just ask your neighbors if you've ever worked in, and how's that contract work out for you? You know, are they flexible on one end, or are they inflexible? Are they going to, you know, on a 2011 where we're not getting bricks, are they going to let me bring my fruit in without a penalty? Those are the things that you're probably going to get from your community more. You can, we'll tell you that, but I think that would be look to your peers and ask how that contract works for them.
Great advice. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, Mark Birch.
Thanks. This is probably for Tony. I don't think there's another opportunity with Jackson Family or Constellation on this question. But you mentioned when you first came to Lake County, Kristen and yourselves were looking for more affordable fruit. And I forget how long you've been buying fruit up here, but as that relationship has grown, do you think that there's been, at least from Kristen Belair, your winemaker, from her standpoint, do you think that it has shifted at all from a financial decision to a quality decision? And then the second half of this question would be, love Mr. Beckstoffer's encouragement for our growth here in Lake County and for championing the Sauvignon Blanc varietal along with Cabernet Sauvignon. And even though you are a Napa-based winery, do you, and Napa brand, do you think that there would ever be an opportunity in Kristen's mind or from your mind and direction of the winery that there could possibly be a marketability for Lake County Sauvignon Blanc or Cabernet Sauvignon?
There's several questions in there. The first one, the quality, we said you came here for cost. The quality, we are very pleased with the Cabernet we purchase up here. It's been a very high quality. Don't you hold that against me in negotiating prices.
I'll never mention it. We are being recorded, though. I just wanted to.
The Cabernet is proving to be very high quality. It's definitely added to our wine. The Sauvignon Blanc, we make a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. The amount that we can buy out of Lake County without it changing our characteristic is such that we don't really buy it. We buy good quality Sauvignon Blanc, don't get me wrong, it's very good quality Sauvignon Blanc, but it is not what's making our wine better or different. It's just a part of our wine. And then would we do more of a Lake County, I guess, appellation, basically, based on the winery ordinance in Napa County? I don't think we couldn't. It wouldn't really work. So we're pretty locked into being a Napa County brand for us because of some of the regulations.
Any final questions for our panelists? Well, with that, I'd like to thank the three of you for your time, first of all, and your thoughts, and also just for being customers of Lake County Fruit, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I just want to have a couple concluding remarks about the whole Momentum series. Two things. We called it Momentum with an exclamation point, not success. Because what we hoped with the board and with the Wine Grape Commission is to sort of expand the discussion around all the parts of our business up here and our reputation as a region. So we talked about climate, we talked about soils, we talked about wine styles, we talked about market forces, we talked about relationships, contracts, history, etc. What we hope to do, and I was just talking about this with Brock during the break, is just expand the reach of that discussion among ourselves as growers and winemakers and wineries up here. We have had some really tremendous presentations and input to see the dynamics of wineries and the constraints that they have from winemakers and their styles and their appreciation of Lake County and our fruit up here. We've had some great history, for example, from Andy. So we want this to be part of an ongoing conversation about developing our strategy for the next 20 years. There's no doubt that there's been an amazing shift from 1995. I often say, or 1990, let's say, it takes 10 years to plant your vineyard, get it up the stake, and learn how to farm it. It takes winemakers 10 years to figure out how to make good and great wine out of it. It takes another 10 years for the world to notice. Now, anytime we can accelerate that process is a win, and certainly we're going to accelerate that process together as opposed to separately. So I hope this series has been very informative to you as it has been for me. We really want to appreciate the time and energy for all of our presenters, the three of you guys, as well as everybody else who came up here. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Andy, for your time. And with that, I'd like to conclude and also ask you, in your pamphlet, there is a survey, which if you could fill out here, we will also email that to everybody else, but if you could fill it out, that'd be great. It's part of our block grant proposal and performance review, and so that's always helpful. So we'd like to invite you for some wine and some hors d'oeuvres after this, and again, thanks for your time, and let's hope for a little more rain. Thank you.